some of the work that I've done on websites, and so I hope it's not too distracting for you. And I was going to also put into the share function and into the chat some of the websites that I'll be showing you that you may want to explore further. And so hope that this will be useful, and hopefully you'll enjoy this as much as I've enjoyed putting it together for you tonight. So I wanted to thank from the outset Ben Weiss and the Historical Society of Ottawa for this invitation to speak and to share some of the work that I've been doing with you. I would also like to thank and acknowledge my amazing colleagues at the University of Ottawa Library, in particular Digital Services, who have over the past 5 years supported my work with students and with OMEKA in particular, and you'll see OMEKA, sort of what's been happening with it tonight. In particular, I'd like to thank Nancy LeMay, Sarah Simpkin, and Roxanne Lefleur, who've supported my work as well as that as many students over the past several years. And I would also like to acknowledge the work of Devin Mordell, who is now with McMaster University Library. With her work and my work at the Association of Canadian Archivists, I've had the opportunity to refresh my OMEKA skills with her workshop and expertise. And so I'll be sharing that with you. And so the outline that I was thinking about tonight was looking at all things digital, and just how I've come to where I am with my research and projects, and thinking about how we manage the digital. And some may already be well advanced in this in terms of how we try to cope with the abundance of material that we have access to, and also introduce a little bit of the work that I do with managing data through visualization, and also seeking out additional sources through different tools that are all open. Looking at some of the online content that's been important to the work that I've done, and then finally ending with OMEKA and sharing with you again some of the projects and works that can be done. And I'm working on a larger project related to the history of Ottawa, and in particular I'm interested in hair and hairdressing, the rise of this industry and how it changed over time from being something that one did very in a limited way to the blossoming of this industry, and looking at that through a digital lens. The work that I'm envisioning will allow different mapping and collaborative work at the end of the day. And so that's my objective. And I'm absolutely happy to answer questions at any time, but know that we'll be having a question and answer period at the end. And so it may seem really, when I talk about doing digital history and that I teach both in digital humanities and digital history, oftentimes folks will ask me, you know, what is digital history and why do I do digital history? And everybody can relate to the rise in computers. We're on Zoom tonight instead of meeting in person. Zoom as a software offers us this opportunity to meet and collaborate and share ideas online. And I've seen this change in terms of desktops that everybody's had to laptops and mobile devices and the tablets that students bring to class, and oftentimes has more power than some of the early computers that many of us, you know, worked on to get our jobs completed or to share information with family and friends. And so I'm looking at the ways in which digital and digital history can provide us with links to the past in a way that is manageable and collaborative. And so taking a look at something that's changed, and again, we see this, and I see this in the website of the Society, and just how engaging it is, how many images there is, there's a timeline. It's a very engaging site versus where we were back in 1993 with only 130 websites in the world at that time, which for me is sort of hard to believe. But by June 1995, 2 years later, there were some 23,500 websites. And by June of 1996, there were 200,000 websites that could be searched online across the world. And we saw that by the late 90s, multinational corporations to junior high school students were posting their own homepages that could be searched, but they were very analog in that they often mirrored pamphlets or books or magazines without a lot of images that might be sent out. And in 1995, and this is an article from the New York Times, they talked about the social, cultural, and economic force that the web was bringing to society, and also thinking about the ways in which print versus electronic was going to change almost everything that we do. And I think we could probably see ways in which this has changed for us. And I'm also thinking about how we cope with this abundance of material. And by the early 2000s, when one would search a term using what was then a relatively new search engine, Google, you could hit very easily up to 300,000 items to search through. I pretty much have a hard time getting through 10, 20, even 100 items when I do a search. How do you manage 300,000 hits? And we can see library and archives, any university library, most internet searches, oftentimes now we're hitting 1 million items that we could take a look at, and it makes it incredibly challenging to know what's reliable, what we can access, and managing that is a tool I feel that will help us to learn more about the past, and in particular, Ottawa in that way. And so we take a look at, now we don't measure things in terms of megabytes or gigabytes, but the measurement of storage that we need to view is overwhelming. And it is a very different experience trying to do this research when we can sit at our computers at home and try to access an enormous amount of material, and how we manage that is something that I hope to share with you tonight, but also hope to excite you about as well, because it kind of gets me a bit excited thinking about the different tools we now have at our disposal. And so one of the things that I want to share with you is just that idea with digital and the projects that we can take a look at it. And I heard you say in the announcements that you're looking for new projects to undertake. And this is that collaborative spirit that we may have been able to meet with in person, but increasingly with the diversity of challenges, we can do this online. And so this morning when I was going through my presentation, thinking about this, I was struck by a notification that I got that there was a new release of 10,701 cookbooks that have been digitized from across North America and around the world, really, that are available for us to take a look at. 10,000, it just boggles the mind in terms of how we can manage it. There's a few from the 16th century, but most date from the late 18th century onward. And you can just think of the ways in which we can harness that information, but it can be also really overwhelming. And so if we go to the Internet Archive and take a look at that, and I'm happy to share this link with everybody, but we can just see that we can flip through virtually this material. And this is just one of literally thousands of projects that have taken place over time. So how do we manage, and how do I manage some of the research that is constantly ongoing with internet sites and projects that are all digital? And so one of the tools that I use is something called Zotero. And again, I'll put the link here. And I don't know if you can see the image well, but this is a database that is free and open source and allows you to keep track of all the different research that you're doing. It helps with databases that you can organize your research. But I think even more than that, it helps you to do collaborative research so that you can share your libraries, you can share sources, and easily pass information along. And for those of us who do spend a lot of time on the computer searching and looking for material related to the history of Ottawa, the history of hair in my case, children and growing up, it allows me to track and manage all of the websites that I visit, and it'll go directly into a database. And it doesn't matter if I'm looking at a podcast or a film or a newspaper article, it will bring it in and help me to organize it. And some material will have all the fields that are relevant will be populated, and others I can add to them. And so I can bring in notes and really find a way to manage it instead of having a desktop, not that I don't have this anyways, but a desktop of many strangely named files that I'm not quite sure what they are, or a browser that has many, many open tabs, and I have to try to figure out what I was looking for. So this is one of the many tools that I use when I'm undertaking history specifically related to Ottawa and to my other projects. And at any time, I'm absolutely happy to share how to use it, etc. And I have shared this with other organizations as well, because it can be really helpful. It also allows people to get together and form groups and share their research effectively. It is available online, and you can add to it from anywhere with a browser that has a plugin, and you can also download it, so it can be portable and bring in PDFs, images, etc. And so that's one way that I manage sometimes the overwhelming amount of information that is out there online. And so these are what I've already said in terms of those skills that you can get in the collaborative research. And I'll show you a couple examples of what I'm working with when I use Zotero at the end to switch over to the internet sources to share with you. And so I'm getting used to this presentation, so I realize that I've already gone through all this information with you. But it's an amazing tool. There's a group that share annually all the work that's been undertaken related to archival studies. There's other groups who are doing it related to new information about digital history, as well as repositories that are being built up to connect us to online collections and sources that we can use for the research. And so some of the tools that help me to navigate this abundance of information are tools like Google Ngram. And if this was in a different circumstance, I'd probably try to seek out from the audience folks who may be familiar with this and folks who have used this. But I use Google Ngram often as a point of departure, especially on a field that's new to me. And I would share with you that Ottawa history is relatively new to me as I'm beginning to learn more about the city and its history. And I come from Western Canada, and while I've been here a long time, I've often sought out the history of the West as opposed to Ottawa, but switching my focus more recently. And so Google Ngram is again a open source online platform that allows you to search published material going back to as early as the 1500s, more from the 1800s onward again, that you can do keyword searches and it will bring you to pamphlets, books, information that is written. And there's been some amazing projects that have been undertaken using Google Ngram. And you can take a look at ideas. So the idea of beauty, the idea of style, and just how those words have changed, and then see how they've been used in historical sources. And that can be a point of departure when you're undertaking something new. The other tool that I will often use is something called Voyant. And this is again, an open online source that you use using an internet browser that allows you to review a large corpus of material. And so an example that I can share with you is that some may be familiar with Jesuit relations, which is now online and in both HTML and in PDF format. And using Voyant, you can upload either a PDF Word document, Excel file, cutting and pasting information in, and it will mine the data, all of the words, and provide you with insight into what words have been used. And the example that I have right here, sometimes going through city directories can be super challenging, and especially if you have to be more recently on site. Happily, we have a lot that we can access that are online. And so what I will do if I'm trying to find out about advertisements for hair or individuals who are barbers looking for their occupation, I can upload a document that might be 300 to 500 pages in length and quickly search through it using Voyant and take a look at the ways in which words fall. In this case, for its 1874 City of Ottawa directory, I see the most common word right off the bat is laborer. But if I wanted to look and undertake a keyword search for hairdresser or saloon or salon, as well as barber, I can easily find that material. And sometimes there's something that's, really soothing when you get to take a look at documents and books page by page. Sometimes time and the amount of material that you're expected to review pushes you to find ways that you can more easily access the information. And Google Ngram and Voyant tools allow me to do that with some of the material. Plus, if I've taken a whole bunch of notes that are specifically related to keywords that I'm looking for with regard to hair, style, coiffure, color, texture, etc., I can put that into Voyant as well, and patterns can emerge that visualize the work that I'm undertaking. That can sometimes be demonstrative of the history that I'm exploring, but it can also, brighten up the work that we do and help people to engage. And all of these tools, Google Ngram, Voyant, are well supportive and provide us with support and how to work with them. And sometimes it can just be a bit of a rabbit hole with the material that you might be interested in looking at. And I've seen some really wonderful projects come out of using both Google Ngram and Voyant that have actually resulted in book-length projects, something that would be aspirational in my case. And so when we take a look at the digital collections that we have available to us, I look at a site like Our Ontario, which is focused on Ontario, and just taking a look at what they have in their collection related to Ottawa specifically. They have more than 100,000 items. How do you begin to take a look at what you're going to look at just for Ottawa with that 100,000 items? And we think about a reading room or a library and how much space that would take up with that 100,000 items. And they can range from books to photographs, audiovisual material, interviews, newspapers, etc. And so from that, it can be really exciting to then see how I can further explore, in my case, the history of hairdressing and children in hair, and find insight into it by looking at some of these digital resources, especially at this time when it's more difficult to travel throughout the province to get access to sources. And many of you probably already know about this material, but I wanted to share just in this context, because what these websites do and what these digital collections offer us is an ability to then curate and pull in information that will be more specific to a project that we're interested in. And so the sources that I take a look at, Early Canada Online has dressmaking and style magazines for women in early Canada, trying to tease out what the dominant views were. And so Early Canada Canadiana Online used to be specifically a subscription-based tool, but more recently they have opened up their collection, and it just continues to grow. And so the amount of resources and information and tools rivals many online collections. And I'm grateful that organizations exist that are providing additional content for researchers and those interested in the past to understand. I've had students use early Canadiana Online as an example, taking a look at a student who was particularly interested in the history of canoes, and so found a great many of sources that he could access as an example among many others. Some may also be familiar with LeapPad. That is an amazing tool that allows you to access House of Commons debates. And this tool, again, you can search by political party, by date, by subject, keyword, and it's one of the great examples, and researchers from Carleton University, from University of Toronto, and other digital humanists work to make this a searchable database. It only goes to 1901 onward, but it can really help to sometimes understand if there is a debate happening that may have affected Ottawa, activities that were happening that may have affected Ottawa, to find out when speeches from the throne took place that may have changed activities that were happening in Ottawa, etc. And so it's a tool that, again, I'm happy to share if people don't have access to this website, that helps to improve access to the past, as opposed to, I think it was the second floor for a long time of the Library and Archives Canada that you could access the House of Commons debates and pull them down and try to access the index. And it could be a time-consuming project, but still enjoyable if this is your source of material that you're looking for. The DPLA stands for the Digital Public Library of America, and while it is a US-based online collection, it does have significant material from Canada. And I think I just typed in Ottawa, Canada, and there were more than, and this is in the image that goes here, there are almost 2,000 material items related to Ottawa, Canada in their collection, most of which are photographs. And so it's interesting to get that perspective of what is being collected, not just in Ottawa or in Ontario, but elsewhere that's related to our city. And this is something that continues to grow as well. And finally, the Internet Archive that I showed you those cookbooks from has a number of hubs across the country where they're working to digitize all manner of items that may relate to community newsletters, university newspapers, that make it possible to take a look at books, video, film, and then also capturing the internet in its various forms as it changes every day. And that's just incredible to think about the ways in which a website might just have a small change that will be recorded by the Internet Archive so that you can go back and forth. And I think that the Internet Archive in particular will be useful not just for those generally studying history, but looking specifically at the ways that cities, for example, are responding to COVID-19 and collecting all of the notifications, the images, the experiences that people are working to share for COVID-19 right now. Oh, I might have messed this up. Let's see. And so this brings me to OMEKA, which is really the bulk of what I wanted to share with you. And I've been working myself with OMEKA and with students for several years. And OMEKA, why I like it, is it's an open source web publishing platform for sharing digital collections and creating media-rich online exhibits. And in this way, I think what's important is that it allows you to manage and curate a collection that might have a specific topic. So it could be related to community leaders. It could be related to a specific part of the city. And then it allows you to collect material, and you can do it as an individual, or you can create a team to take a look at it. And then you can use those digital items to create exhibits that individuals can engage with in terms of text, images, video, etc. And so Devin Mordell, as I mentioned at the outset, who has been giving many workshops over the past several months related to OMEKA, it's a sort of a flow where you get a digital collection like the ones that I've shared. You create metadata that suits the needs of your project and bring it in from websites, and then you can create an online exhibit for a group to engage with or the public generally. And so you'll see from the collections that I'll be able to show you is that some students want their work shared and others don't. And my hope and my thinking is that by creating an exhibit that's related to hair and appearance and the professions that existed over time, that might be a more engaging way for folks to participate in the history of this profession in Ottawa in particular. Sometimes it's bringing a smaller collection to life in an engaging way. And I'll show you some of the ways in which OMEKA has been used to create significant collections for communities. And so anybody can use a free, you can sign up for OMEKA and have a single use an account where you would be given 500 megabytes of storage space. I believe it's limited to 64 megabytes per item. And this significantly derailed my project, not just for this idea with regard to the history of Ottawa, but sometimes technology can work against you, and that space and sharing items can be challenging. And so when I was first beginning to work on a project related to Ottawa, a colleague at Brock University let me know that he has this amazing scanner and that we'd be able to scan some maps that he had of Ottawa, and the title page had one of the maps. But his scanner was so high end that the clarity and the pixelation that it was able to offer was incredible. But that also meant that the file size was huge. And so when I went and I scanned all this work and I brought it back to be able to work and upload it to OMEKA, and then realized that there was a significant challenge in that everything was too big for the initial upload. And so I had to transform everything. So sometimes the best and shiny isn't always what will be usable in especially systems that are meant to be community based and open source. And so this program itself can be used on a website interface, and you don't need to download any particular programs. But if you'd like to, and you have hard drive space and a server, then you can certainly access OMEKA that is for a larger project, and I'll take a look at that in a moment. And so OMEKA itself, it has plugin features that you can easily build an exhibit, and with minimal work, you can also add pages and engage your audience in different ways using images, audio, visual, films, etc. And so the more robust program is institutional and usually has servers, and more folks will access it at the same time, and there's different accounts that are linked up to it. But I'm interested in the one that a small community or group can use, and that's what I wanted to share with you. And so I'm going to take this and show you what I mean in a few moments here, but this one that I'm pointing at right now, and I don't know if you can see it, if it's showing it to you, but University of Toronto has several OMEKA exhibits that feature their collection. I'm going to show you how you can add a collection and how this can be easily managed, share some of the work that students have undertaken. And then this here that we'll get a look at is probably what first intrigued me about this program. And so this is the 9/11 archive. And so this was an OMEKA project that started not too long after 9/11. I want to say in the late 2000s and early 2011 or so. And so what's interesting about OMEKA is that you can have people working on a project that will add items, but you can also welcome an audience and a community to contribute and add their own material. So if somebody has a photographic collection or they have material that might be of interest, they can add and upload their items to the site. And so what started off as a small project that was meant to document 9/11 and how it changed the community in New York in particular, became a collection with over 150,000 items that were mostly uploaded by community members. And that entire archive has now been transferred to the National Archive in the United States. A similar project was undertaken for Hurricane Katrina. And I can see all sorts of ways in which you bring you know, a kernel of an idea, of an interest, and share that. And others who may have information can contribute as well. And so you can build your collection with items, and then from your collection, build your exhibit. And I'll show you that. Make sure we get through this. And so these are just examples of items, and we can see very sort of cursory that there are images here. And this is based on a project that a student did for World War I, looking at medals that were awarded and then map them so that you could click on to see where individuals were living when they were awarded medals in the First World War. And so you can add photographs, PDFs, video, film, audio, as I've said, and then the crowdsourcing or the contributions that individuals can make. And so you can individually upload items, you can link them through HTML so that you don't have as much memory being taken because you're limited to 500 megabytes. But then if you're working on a project and you have all sorts of data that you've captured, you can batch upload with CVS files, and this can save a lot of time and data entry. And we can take a look at the different plugins that are available as well. And so this has been something that is just sort of one of those ways in which an open source program is able to make things easier, and people have adapted it because it is a community of users that are continually improving both OMEKA and Zotero as examples. And so you simply upload the files. It's very easy and user-friendly. And then you work to describe the items and tag them. And so each item may have up to 15 fields or elements, and they can be title, creator, subject, description, publisher, contributor, date, type, format identifier, source, language, relation, coverage, and then making sure that we acknowledge the rights. And you can edit, you can remove some if you would like, or make them more visible. But this provides you with a foundation that many may be familiar with in terms of Dublin Core. And so once you have your items, you can put them into collections and then create your exhibit. And I'll put these into the chat after, but there's as I said, there's workshops that are being provided across the country that show you how you can use this. And they're usually 2.5 hours in length, but an organization called Programming Historian has put online lessons on how to use OMEKA that can hone your skills and give you more examples. And so this is using omeka.net, and then how you can create an exhibit. And again, I'll share those with you in the chat afterwards. And that's it. And so just to give you an example, I'll show you that there are paid options. I mentioned that it's the omeka.net is a free open source program, but if you wanted to have something that might provide you with a little bit of storage and more options for your site, then you could look at some paid options. And but you could also look at partnerships with universities, with other organizations that might be able to provide the infrastructure. And so there's lots of opportunities here. So I'm going to do a new share in a moment and show you sort of what I've been talking about in terms of collections and websites. And then I'm happy to take questions because I think I'm just about at the time. And so hopefully right now you are seeing examples of collections. So I'm changing, we're going to move this over so that I can see. So do you see that? No, so that's a new share. Let's see here. Can you see the collections now?
It's a little easier now. It's a little larger.
Okay, perfect. So this is an example of the OMEKA site that I've created for digital history over time. And you can see, I'm going to just do this. You can see that there's 710 items that have been added over time. And they range anywhere from a wartime poster to newspaper articles, legislation, lots of photographs. And so I can take a look, and these have all been added over time by students. And in some cases, myself in this regard. And so then within that organization, there are the collections that will often a discrete organization that students have undertaken. And so I wanted to show you a couple of examples. I mentioned the digital archive for September 11th. And so here it is that people can contribute. And then again, this is all formatted using the OMEKA system. And so it can be super helpful to sort of see what people have done with it with this program. Another example I want to show you is this is a project that outlines Shakespeare in Ottawa. It's not my project, but it's part of a larger project in the English department at the University of Ottawa. And they've used other tools to demonstrate how Shakespeare was shown in Ottawa from 1867 to 2017 using mapping technology and images. And so they've input all of this information into OMEKA and linked it for you to take a look at.
Cool.
And then this just gives you an example of some of the projects that students have undertaken. And so over time, they've created 17. I'm looking at this exhibit that's setting up shop in terms of setting up a place for people to have their hair dressed or cut, styled, etc. And then looking at the ways in which students have added material related to, again, Ottawa. And I'll leave you with one final exhibit because I think I could go on, and I'm going to just find it in terms of Ottawa workers. And this is a project that students undertook at Carleton. Oh, let's go collection exhibits, sorry. And so this was created with the student uploading information about workers' history, looking at soldiers, farmers, unions, and then put together, instead of a paper, a collection that showcased the early history of Ottawa and its workers. So I'm going to end here for now. It's kind of a bit anticlimactic, but I'm happy to take questions, and I will share a lot of the links that I've talked about. I will stop sharing.
I realize I can unmute myself. I do have some questions for you, Joe, before we get to the thank yous. We have one that's asking about LIPAD, L-I-P-A-D. You mentioned that earlier. Can it search Hansard's specifically in regard to private members' bills?
That's a great question. I would take a look at that and see, and then I can come up with an answer. Off the top of my head, I don't think I've looked for a private members bill, but I could take a look and certainly share the.
LIPAD is free to join, though, is it? I guess for that one.
It's online, and I'm just going to share that right now.
Well, while you're looking at that, there's a couple more questions that are more Ottawa specific about photographs. So we'll try one of these. Someone was mentioning, how accurate are the early lithographs in documenting the historical record, and can some early lithographs be mistaken for photographs?
That's a really great question. I've mostly worked with photographs, and so I'm not sure if I can answer that correctly in terms of, because most of my experience does relate to the photographs, and so
Well, I've got another one here on photographs, and I can ask you about that, because there's another person who's got curious about. He asked, why the lack of construction photos from earlier time? But what he mentions here, as a stonemason, I've been looking through old construction photos of Ottawa, looking to see the technique that was used to cut and fit stones. In almost every photo, the masonry is already done, and it looks like wood and finishing is being done. So he's asking, why are there so few, or have you noticed construction photos of early Ottawa in your research?
Yeah, I've just started looking at them in terms of trying to understand the buildings that existed and where things were. And so I feel like there may be another member who may be able to answer specifically that question about construction photographs. Because I mostly deal with people, and I'm looking specifically at hair and images of that. So I'm less familiar with the construction photographs, but certainly I've come across them in my work. And so I feel like I'm not going to be able to answer that.
If I could
okay, go ahead, Lynn.
No, I was just going to say, you have to remember also that there really wasn't photography until about the 1850s. So any construction that predates the 1850s was documented primarily by the British troops that were stationed here, building the canal, and then earlier buildings in Ottawa. And they were artists. They were trained primarily as watercolorists. So yes, you would have a documentation of what was being done, but there was a certain amount of artistic license, and you would not have had any really close-up structural analysis of the stone going into a say an 1830s home.
Oh, no. Yeah, how much I do know.
Another question here from Kathy. She mentioned something. Do you know anything about Google Ngram and what it is?
Yes.
Okay, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, and so I'm just going to see if I have this open. So Google Ngram, it's founded on a library of scanned material that Google undertook, and allows you to undertake a research, and you can base it on language, date, country, and pull out material. So the example that I can give is a historian who undertook to compare ideas of liberty and justice in the United States, and then fairness and freedom in New Zealand. And so looked up these ideas using Google Ngram, came up with hundreds and hundreds of pamphlets that compared both of them and could get a sense of the change over time with regard to these ideas. And so I've used it to take a look at, again, ideas of beauty, ideas of age, of how we describe children, youth, etc. And it can be an important point of departure. It can be a bit challenging because Ottawa appears many places, so we don't always get Ottawa, Canada. But sometimes taking a look at some of the material, I can change the search parameters. So I'm just going to provide an example that I was looking at earlier on in the chat for folks as well. I'm not sure if anybody else has used Google Ngram for their work. There we go.
Does that come up? Do we have that? No. Can anyone see that? I'm not sure.
Oh, I can. Do you want me to share the screen with the Google
Oh, did you
Ngram?
want? Oh, I thought you were going to show us the screen. You don't? Can you do that?
Yeah, I can for sure.
Yeah, because I've never heard of Ngram till now. That sounds like it might be useful.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. And so you can see how you can change the date and you can go earlier than 1800. You can change the language and it'll look in the corpus of American English, just English. It'll look at English fiction, French, German, Hebrew. And so this gives you an example, taking a look at Frankenstein, Sherlock Holmes, Albert Einstein. And then when you take a look further, it will provide you with the percentage of material that includes Albert Einstein's name or Sherlock Holmes. I'm just going to see here. I go back here. And then you can actually take a look at all the publications that are there. And so I'd have to go again. But you can then, it will link you to every book that is related to that term. So if it's beauty that appears, and that may not be a good example, but if you were looking at Einstein, that book that appears, you can then look at that book. And so again, it can be hundreds and hundreds of pages of material. So let me just pull this back up again and do a new search. And so you can take a look that it doesn't appear, but if I look up freedom, I can then have the books appear and go through them. And so you can explore, and it's not necessarily one that may yield extensive results for Ottawa, but it can be something that you may not find that material normally in libraries or online. And so it provides you with that opportunity. And if I go back here again, I can only, if I want to just look at the books that are from that time, then I can take a look at an 1816 book as an example. So if I'm looking at photography or lithographs or watercolors, I could take a look at some of the publications that are related to that and dig deeper into it. And it goes on, you know, for pages in some cases. And you can see that it would just, you know, 10 per page and it will go on. And so it will show you how, go back here, how they're parsed out. So it'll smooth them so that you see that there are more books about freedom in this period, 1800 to 1838. But that freedom, if we're looking at it from 1839 to 1987, that's a very long time for the same amount of books in this period, 1800 to 1838. And so you can sort of see patterns emerge in terms of ideas for something in this case like freedom, fairness, and justice. But you can also look at beauty norms. You can look at ideas of childhood. And so all of these kind of weave in tangentially to my work on Ottawa as I become a sort of new researcher there.
And someone was asking, is a lot of the stuff copyright free, or I guess some of it could be copyright, some of you have to watch the legal use?
Yeah, a lot of material, just have to check the digital rights. Oftentimes they are open and you acknowledge it. And so you check the rights on it. And so it'll depend on where you've taken it from and how you source it. And that's sort of most of the collection material when they put it digitized is asking for recognition or citations. And so this develops those habits of providing that information as well.
And we got one last question here. This one you might have to put your thinking cap on for.
Uh-oh.
From James, he asks, what is the oldest photograph known to exist of Ottawa? Or Ottawa/Bytown, he says. Not too sure. Or maybe what's the oldest one you've seen? Do you have any?
That's a really good question.
That's probably why James asked it.
Yeah, I think that because I've taken a look more in the 1870s, and so I'm more familiar, and so I don't think I'm going to find the oldest. So I think somebody in our group here may know the answer more than I do in terms of the oldest photograph.
Well, I think we're all caught up on questions here. So if we don't have any more questions, I think the problem with Zoom here is that you don't get to hear people's applause when you end your conversation so if you can imagine, and I'm going to say, if you can imagine 86 people applauding because we speak with 86 participants tonight. So unless you, Lynn, if you can unmute everyone, I don't know, just imagine the sound of that. So I really want to thank you because you almost feel like you can't really hear the appreciation that we have.
That's okay.
Some of your time for this. I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot tonight. And I have Did I mute again? Am I okay?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, it looks like it said.
It may have been me. I was trying to unmute everybody. But,
yeah.
I seem just to be able to control the mute function.
Thank you very much.
If we're all unmuted, we can all applaud here, but I see some are still muted. But the reason I say that I would like to bring you back sometime is because I know we've been discussing about trying to incorporate more Indigenous programming into it. And I see from your bio, even though you've talked about digital records, that you've obviously got a strong background